The morning sun was just coming up over the hills when Rosa stepped out onto her front porch. She held a steaming cup of coffee in her hands, but her mind wasn't on the drink. Instead, she was looking at all the work that needed to be done around the ranch. The fence posts were leaning. The barn door was hanging crooked, and she could see 3 cows wandering where they shouldn't be. At 26 years old, Rosa had been running this place all by herself for 2 long years. Her husband Miguel had died in a car accident when their truck went off the road during a bad storm. One day she had a partner to help with everything, and the next day she was completely alone with 2 small children and a ranch that seemed to get bigger and more demanding every single day. Her son Luis was 8 years old now, and her daughter Carmen was only 5. They were good kids, but they were still too young to do the heavy work that needed to be done around here. Luis tried his best to help, carrying feed buckets and checking on the chickens, but he was just a little boy. Carmen mostly played with the barn cats and picked wildflowers, which was exactly what a 5-year-old should be doing. The problem was that Rosa felt like she was drowning in responsibilities. Every morning brought new challenges. Yesterday, the water pump had started making strange noises. Last week, 2 calves had gotten sick and she'd had to call the veterinarian, which cost money she didn't really have. The month before that, a storm had damaged part of the roof on the main barn. Rosa walked back into the kitchen and sat down at the old wooden table where stacks of bills were waiting for her. The mortgage payment was due in 10 days, and she was short by $300. The electric bill was overdue, and the feed store had started asking when she'd be able to pay her account. She picked up each piece of paper and looked at the numbers, hoping somehow they might be different than yesterday. Her coffee was getting cold, but she didn't notice. She was too busy adding up numbers in her head, trying to figure out how to make everything work. Maybe she could sell a few more cattle, but beef prices were low right now. Maybe she could take on some part-time work in town, but that would mean leaving the ranch unattended and the children with a babysitter she couldn't afford. The sound of little feet running down the stairs broke her concentration. Carmen appeared in the kitchen wearing her favorite dress with yellow flowers on it. Her dark hair was messy from sleep and she was carrying her stuffed rabbit. "Good morning, Mama," Carmen said, climbing up onto Rosa's lap. "Are you sad again?" Rosa hugged her daughter close and tried to smile. "No, sweetheart. Mama's just thinking about grown-up things. Are you hungry for breakfast?" Luis came into the kitchen a few minutes later, already dressed and ready to help with the morning chores. He was getting so tall and looked more like his father every day. Sometimes Rosa caught herself staring at him, seeing Miguel's eyes and the same stubborn chin. "Mom, I think one of the chickens is sick," Luis said. "She's not moving around much and she didn't eat yesterday." Rosa sighed quietly. Another problem to solve, another expense if they needed to call someone out to look at the animals. "Okay, honey. We'll check on her after breakfast." While the children ate their cereal, Rosa stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the land that stretched for miles in every direction. This ranch had been in Miguel's family for 60 years. His grandfather had bought it when Miguel's father was just a baby. Miguel had grown up here, learned to ride horses and work cattle on this very ground. After Miguel died, everyone had told Rosa she should sell the place and move to the city. Her mother called every week, begging her to come home where there would be babysitters and better schools and steady jobs. Her sister had found her apartment listings online and kept sending them in the mail. Even Miguel's brother thought she was being foolish, trying to keep the ranch going by herself. But Rosa couldn't bring herself to sell. This wasn't just a piece of property. It was where Miguel had proposed to her under the big oak tree by the creek. It was where Luis had taken his first steps in the barn while Miguel was fixing a piece of equipment. It was where Carmen had been born during a snowstorm when they couldn't get to the hospital in time. Every fence post, every acre of pasture, every building on this land held memories of their life together. How could she take that away from her children? How could she let Miguel's family legacy just disappear because things got difficult? Rosa finished washing the breakfast dishes and got the children ready for their day. Luis would help her check on the animals and do some light work around the barn. Carmen would play nearby where Rosa could keep an eye on her. It was the same routine they followed every day, but somehow it never felt like enough. As they walked out to the barn, Rosa noticed that the fence around the main pasture was looking worse than ever. 3 posts were definitely loose and the wire was sagging in several places. If the cattle got out and wandered onto the road, It could be dangerous for drivers and expensive for her if there was an accident, but fixing a fence required tools, materials and skills that Rosa wasn't sure she had. Miguel had always handled the heavy repair work while she took care of the house, the garden, and the bookkeeping. She'd learned a lot in the past 2 years, but there were still so many things that felt overwhelming when she had to do them alone. The sick chicken that Luis had mentioned was definitely not well. Rosa picked her up gently and could feel that she was much too light. Her eyes were dull and she didn't seem interested in the corn that Rosa offered her. Another decision to make, another expense to worry about. Standing in the barn with her children playing nearby, Rosa felt the familiar weight of loneliness that seemed to follow her everywhere these days. She missed having someone to talk to about the daily decisions and problems. She missed having someone to share the work and the worries. Most of all, she missed having someone who understood why this place was so important and why giving up wasn't really an option. The nearest neighbor lived 15 miles away, and they had their own problems to deal with. The mailman came by every few days, but their conversations were always brief and polite. Sometimes Rosa went for days without talking to another adult except for quick conversations at the feed store or the grocery store in town. But even when the loneliness felt overwhelming, Rosa knew she had to keep going. Luis and Carmen were depending on her. Miguel's memory deserved better than giving up when things got tough. And somewhere deep in her heart, she still believed that this life could work if she could just figure out how to make all the pieces fit together. As the day warmed up and the children settled into their play, Rosa grabbed her tools and headed for the broken fence. Maybe she couldn't fix everything at once, but she could try to tackle one problem at a time. That's how she'd been surviving for 2 years now, and somehow she'd have to make it work for as long as it took. It was Tuesday afternoon and the heat was getting serious. Rosa had been wrestling with the broken water pump for almost 2 hours and sweat was dripping into her eyes. The pump kept making that awful grinding noise every time she tried to start it, and she was starting to worry that it might be completely broken. Without water for the cattle, she'd have a real emergency on her hands. Luis and Carmen were taking their afternoon nap inside the house, which was the only reason Rosa felt comfortable working on equipment that might be dangerous. She'd learned to time her most difficult jobs around their sleep schedule, since there wasn't anyone else to watch them if something went wrong. The instruction manual for the pump was spread out on the ground next to her, held down with rocks so the wind wouldn't blow it away, but the pictures and words weren't making much sense, and Rosa was beginning to think she'd have to call a repairman from town. That would mean another expense she couldn't really afford, and probably waiting several days before anyone could come out to the ranch. She was lying on her back, trying to see underneath the pump housing, when she heard the sound of a truck coming up the long driveway. Rosa scrambled to her feet and wiped her hands on her jeans. They weren't expecting any visitors, and unexpected company always made her a little nervous when she was alone with the children. The truck was old and dusty, probably white originally, but now more of a faded gray color. It was moving slowly, like the driver was being careful not to kick up too much dust or disturb anything. Rosa appreciated that kind of consideration, since some people came racing up the drive like they owned the place. As the truck got closer, Rosa could see that there was only one person inside. The driver looked like a man, but she couldn't make out much more than that through the windshield. The truck came to a stop near the house, and Rosa heard the engine make a few uncomfortable sounds before it finally went quiet. The driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out. He was probably in his 30s, with brown hair that needed a haircut and clothes that looked like he'd been doing physical work for a living. His jeans were worn but clean, and his boots were the kind that people who actually worked with animals would wear, not the fancy ones that city folks bought to look like cowboys. What Rosa noticed most, though, was the way he moved. He wasn't in a hurry, and he didn't act like he owned the world. Instead, he looked around respectfully, taking in the ranch buildings and the lay of the land like someone who understood how much work went into keeping a place like this running. Afternoon. "Ma'am," the man said, touching the brim of his hat politely. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm having some trouble with my truck. The engine got too hot, and I was wondering if I might be able to buy some water from you to cool it down." Rosa was surprised by how courteous he was. Most people who stopped by acted like she should be grateful for their company, or tried to talk down to her because she was a woman running a ranch alone. This stranger was treating her like any other rancher he might ask for help. "Of course," Rosa said. "There's a hose right over there by the barn. Help yourself to whatever you need." The man nodded his thanks and walked over to the hose. Rosa watched as he popped the hood of his truck and began carefully adding water to the radiator. He knew what he was doing, and he wasn't making a mess or being careless with her equipment. "I'm Jake, by the way," he called over to her. "Jake Henderson. I really appreciate you letting me use your water." "Rosa," she replied, "and it's no problem at all. Truck trouble is something that can happen to anybody." While Jake worked on his truck, Rosa tried to get back to fighting with the water pump, but she found herself glancing over at him every few minutes. There was something about the way he carried himself that reminded her of Miguel. Not that they looked alike, but they both had that calm, steady way of approaching problems that she'd always admired. After about 20 minutes, Jake closed the hood of his truck and walked over to where Rosa was working. "That should do it for the radiator," he said. "But I think I better let the engine cool down completely before I try to drive anywhere. Would it be all right if I waited here for a little while?" "Sure," Rosa said. "You're welcome to sit on the porch if you want some shade." Instead of heading for the porch, though, Jake looked down at the water pump and the scattered tools around Rosa's feet. "Having some trouble with your pump?" he asked. Rosa sighed and pushed her hair back from her face. "It's been making awful noises and now it won't start at all. I'm starting to think it might be completely broken." "Mind if I take a look?" Jake asked. "I've worked with pumps like this before." Rosa hesitated for a moment. She'd gotten used to handling problems by herself, and part of her was proud of what she'd learned to do over the past 2 years. But she was also practical enough to know when she was in over her head. "I'd appreciate that," she said, "but I should warn you I don't have money to pay for repair work right now." Jake smiled, and Rosa noticed that it was a genuine, warm expression. "I'm not looking to charge anybody for anything," he said, "just offering to help a fellow rancher who's having a tough day." For the next hour, Rosa watched Jake work on the pump with the kind of skill that comes from years of experience. He didn't rush or get frustrated when something didn't work the first time. Instead, he methodically checked each part of the system, explaining to Rosa what he was looking for and what each component was supposed to do. "The problem is right here," Jake finally said, pointing to a small part that Rosa never would have thought to check. "This little valve got stuck, which caused all that noise you were hearing. And this belt here is loose, which is why the whole thing stopped working." Within another 30 minutes, Jake had the pump running smoothly again. The awful grinding noise was gone, and water was flowing exactly the way it was supposed to. Rosa couldn't believe how much better it sounded. "How did you learn to do that?" Rosa asked. "Growing up on a ranch teaches you a little bit about everything," Jake said, cleaning his hands with a rag from his truck. "My family had a place up in Colorado until a few years ago. When you're 50 miles from the nearest repair shop, you learn to fix things yourself or go without." Just then, Rosa heard the screen door slam, and Luis came running around the corner of the house. He'd woken up from his nap and probably heard voices outside. Carmen was right behind him, still carrying her stuffed rabbit and looking a little sleepy. "Mom, who's that?" Luis asked, stopping short when he saw Jake. "This is Jake," Rosa said. "He helped Mama fix the water pump." "Jake, these are my children, Luis and Carmen." Jake crouched down so he was at eye level with the children. "Nice to meet you both," he said seriously, like he was talking to adults instead of little kids. "You've got a beautiful ranch here." Luis puffed up with pride, and Carmen smiled shyly from behind Rosa's legs. It had been a long time since a man had paid attention to her children in such a natural, comfortable way. "Are you a real cowboy?" Carmen asked, her curiosity finally overcoming her shyness. Jake laughed. "Well, I work with cattle and horses, so I suppose that makes me a cowboy. What do you think?" As the afternoon wore on, Rosa found herself genuinely enjoying Jake's company. He was easy to talk to, and he seemed to understand the challenges of ranch life without her having to explain everything. When she mentioned that she'd been worried about getting the pump fixed before the cattle ran out of water, he nodded like he'd been in similar situations himself. When it finally came time for Jake to test his truck and see if it was ready for the road, Rosa felt a little disappointed. It had been nice to have adult conversation and to get help with a problem that had been stressing her out all day. "Thank you again for the water and for letting me wait here," Jake said as he started his truck. The engine sounded much better than it had when he'd arrived. "Thank you for fixing my pump," Rosa replied. "I really don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Jake tipped his hat one more time and drove slowly back down the driveway. Rosa watched until his truck disappeared around the bend, then went back to her evening chores with the children. But she found herself thinking about their unexpected visitor long after the sun went down. Rosa woke up the next morning thinking about Jake and wondering where he was headed in that old truck of his. She'd been surprised by how much she'd enjoyed having another adult around, someone who understood ranch work and didn't make her feel like she was doing everything wrong. It had been the first time in months that she'd felt like she had a partner. Even if it was just for a couple of hours. After breakfast, she and the children went out to check on the cattle and do their regular morning chores. The water pump was still running perfectly, which made Rosa smile every time she heard it. Such a simple thing, having equipment that worked the way it was supposed to, but it felt like a small miracle after struggling with it for so long. Around 10 o'clock, Rosa heard the sound of a truck coming up the driveway again. Her heart jumped a little, hoping it might be Jake, but she told herself not to be silly. He was probably 100 miles away by now, heading wherever it was that traveling ranch hands went when they moved on. But when she looked toward the road, she could see that familiar dusty truck making its way toward the house. Louise saw it too and came running over from where he'd been throwing corn to the chickens. "Mom, it's the cowboy," he said excitedly. "He came back." Rosa tried to act casual, but she could feel herself smiling as Jake's truck pulled to a stop near the barn. This time, though, the engine didn't sound good when he turned it off. Instead of the smooth running from yesterday, there were some concerning noises that even Rosa could tell meant trouble. Jake got out of the truck looking frustrated and a little embarrassed. "Morning, Rosa," he called. "I'm afraid I've got more truck problems. Transmission started acting up about 5 miles down the road. I was wondering if it would be all right to leave it here while I figure out what to do next." "Of course," Rosa said. "What kind of trouble are you having?" Jake explained that the transmission was slipping and making grinding noises, which probably meant expensive repairs that would take several days to complete. He'd called the garage in town from a gas station, but they were backed up with work and couldn't even look at it until next week. "I've got some money saved up," Jake said, "but not enough to stay in a hotel for a week while I wait for parts and repairs. I was thinking I might camp out somewhere until the truck's ready." Rosa looked at Jake, then at her children who were hanging on every word, and then at all the work that needed to be done around the ranch. An idea was forming in her mind, but she wasn't sure if it was smart or crazy. "Jake," she said slowly, "can I ask you something? What kind of ranch work do you do when you're working?" "All kinds," Jake replied. "Cattle, horses, fence repair, equipment maintenance, hay cutting, branding, whatever needs doing. I've been working ranches since I was 16 years old." Rosa took a deep breath. "I've got a proposition for you if you're interested. I need help around here, especially with some of the heavier work that I can't manage by myself. If you're willing to work for room and board plus some pay, you could stay in the barn loft until your truck is fixed and you've earned enough to get back on the road." Jake looked surprised. "Are you sure about that? I'm basically a stranger who showed up in your driveway 2 days in a row. You're a stranger who fixed my water pump without being asked, and who treats my children with respect," Rosa said. "And frankly, I could really use the help. There's a lot that needs to be done before winter, and some of it is just too much for me to handle alone." Jake was quiet for a moment, looking around at the ranch buildings and the pastures. Rosa could see him taking inventory of what needed to be done, probably calculating how much work was involved. "What kind of pay were you thinking?" he asked. Rosa named a figure that was fair but not generous since money was still tight. Jake nodded like it sounded reasonable to him. "And the barn loft? Is that actually livable?" "Come take a look," Rosa said, leading him toward the barn. The loft had been Miguel's workshop and office space. It had electricity, a small window, and enough room for a bed and basic furniture. Rosa had been storing some old household items up there, but it wouldn't take much work to clear it out and make it comfortable. "It's not fancy," Rosa said, "but it's dry and warm and you'd have privacy." Jake climbed up into the loft and looked around. "This would be fine," he said. "Better than camping for sure. But are you comfortable with having someone you barely know staying on your property with your children here?" It was a fair question, and Rosa appreciated that he'd thought to ask it. "Honestly, I'm more comfortable with someone around who knows what they're doing than I am trying to handle everything by myself. And Luis and Carmen seemed to like you yesterday. They spent the next hour working out the details. Jake would help with all the routine ranch work, plus tackle some of the bigger projects that Rosa had been putting off because they were too difficult or dangerous to do alone. In return, he'd get meals, a place to sleep, and wages that would help him get back on the road once his truck was repaired. "There's one more thing," Jake said as they shook hands on the agreement. "I want you to know that I'm not looking to take advantage of your situation or overstay my welcome. When my truck's fixed and I've saved enough money to move on, I'll be moving on. I just want to be clear about that." Rosa nodded, though she felt a little disappointed by his words. "I understand," she said. "This is a temporary arrangement that helps both of us." They started moving Jake's few belongings up to the loft right away. He didn't have much, some clothes, a bedroll, a toolbox, and a couple of books. Rosa was struck by how little he owned, like he was used to being able to pack up and move at a moment's notice. While Jake organized his space, Rosa explained the ranch routine and showed him where everything was located. She was impressed by the questions he asked. They were the kinds of questions that someone with real experience would think to ask, about the cattle's health history and the condition of the equipment and which pastures needed the most attention. Luis and Carmen were fascinated by having Jake around. They followed him as he toured the property, listening to his comments about the animals and the land. When he mentioned that one of the horses looked like it needed its hooves trimmed, Luis immediately offered to help catch it. "Do you know how to trim hooves?" Rosa asked. "Sure do," Jake said. "It's not difficult if you know what you're doing and the horse trusts you." That afternoon, Rosa watched Jake work with the horse. He was patient and gentle, talking to the animal in a quiet voice while he cleaned and trimmed each hoof. Luis stood nearby, holding the lead rope and asking questions about why hoof care was important. "My dad used to do that," Luis said quietly. "I remember watching him, but I was too little to help." Jake looked at the boy seriously. "Your dad taught you well about taking care of animals. I can tell you've been helping your mom a lot." Rosa felt tears spring to her eyes. It had been a long time since anyone had acknowledged how much Luis had grown up and how much responsibility he'd taken on since Miguel died. As the day wore on, Rosa began to see just how much Jake could help with. He fixed a gate that had been hanging crooked for months, moved some heavy feed bags that Rosa had been struggling with, and identified several maintenance issues that could become serious problems if they weren't addressed soon. At dinner time, Rosa invited Jake to eat with the family. She made extra rice and beans, and they sat around the kitchen table while the children told Jake about school and their friends and their favorite animals on the ranch. "Mom makes the best tortillas," Carmen announced proudly. "I can tell," Jake said, taking another one from the basket. "These are delicious." After dinner, Jake helped clear the table and wash dishes without being asked. When Rosa protested that he didn't need to help with housework, he smiled and said, "My mama would box my ears if she knew I sat around while someone else cleaned up after me." As the evening settled in and the children got ready for bed, Rosa realized how different the house felt with another adult around. It wasn't just the extra help with work, though that was certainly welcome. It was the feeling that she wasn't carrying all the responsibility by herself anymore, that there was someone else who cared about whether things got done properly and safely. When Jake headed out to the barn for the night, he stopped to thank Rosa again for giving him the opportunity to work and stay on the ranch. "I think this arrangement is going to work out well for both of us," he said. Rosa agreed, but as she watched him walk across the yard to the barn, she found herself wondering what would happen when his truck was fixed and it came time for him to move on. For the first time in 2 years, she wasn't facing the challenges of ranch life completely alone, and she was already starting to dread going back to the way things had been before. 2 weeks had passed since Jake started working on the ranch, and Rosa could hardly believe the difference his presence had made. Every morning she woke up knowing that she wouldn't have to face the day's challenges completely alone. There was someone else who understood the work, someone who could lift the heavy things and fix the complicated problems that had been keeping her awake at night. Jake was an early riser, often up before dawn to check on the cattle and make sure all the equipment was running properly. Rosa would find him in the barn when she came out to start the morning chores, already feeding the horses or cleaning water troughs. He worked with a quiet efficiency that reminded her of Miguel, though their styles were different. Where Miguel had been methodical and cautious, Jake seemed to have an instinct for what needed to be done and the quickest way to do it safely. The children had adjusted to having Jake around much faster than Rosa had expected. Luis followed him everywhere, soaking up knowledge about ranching and asking endless questions about cattle and horses and land management. Jake answered every question seriously, never talking down to the boy or brushing off his curiosity. Why do the cows always eat the grass in some places but not others? Luis asked one morning as they walked through the pasture together. Good eye, Jake said. See how the grass is different colors in different spots? Cattle are smart. They know which grass has the most nutrition and which areas might have plants that aren't good for them. They're better at managing pasture than most people give them credit for. Carmen had warmed up to Jake too, though in her own 5-year-old way. She liked to bring him flowers that she picked around the ranch buildings, and she'd appointed herself as his official assistant when he was doing any work that involved tools. Her job was to hand him screws or hold small parts, and she took these responsibilities very seriously. Jake needs the red screwdriver now, she would announce importantly, sorting through his toolbox with intense concentration. Rosa found herself looking forward to the evening conversations after the children went to bed. She and Jake would sit on the front porch talking about the day's work and planning what needed to be done next. It felt good to have someone to share the decision-making with, someone who understood the practical realities of ranch life. That north fence line is in worse shape than I thought, Jake said one evening. Some of those posts are rotted clear through. If we get a strong wind, the whole section could go down. How big of a job is it to replace? Rosa asked, though she was already dreading the answer. It's not impossible, but it's going to take time and materials. We'll need new posts, new wire, and probably a full weekend to do it right. But it needs to be done before winter, or you could end up with cattle scattered all over the county. Rosa nodded, adding fence repair to the growing list of projects that Jake had identified around the ranch. It was overwhelming sometimes, realizing how many things had been slowly falling apart while she'd been focused on just keeping the basic operations running. But it was also a relief to have someone who could see the problems and knew how to fix them. Jake's truck was still at the garage in town, waiting for parts that seemed to take forever to arrive. Every few days he'd call to check on the progress, but the mechanic kept telling him it would be at least another week. Rosa found herself hoping the delays would continue, though she felt guilty for thinking that way. As the days passed, Rosa began to notice things about Jake that she hadn't picked up on at first. He was careful with money, buying only what was absolutely necessary when he went to town for supplies. He kept his clothes and belongings neat and organized like someone who'd learned to live with very little space. And sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, she'd catch him looking out at the horizon with an expression that seemed almost sad. One evening, after the children were in bed, Rosa asked Jake about his family's ranch in Colorado. He was quiet for a long moment before answering. We lost it 3 years ago, he said finally. Drought, debt, and some bad decisions all at the same time. My father had borrowed money to expand the operation, and when the drought hit, we couldn't pay it back. The bank foreclosed and my parents lost everything they'd worked for their whole lives. I'm sorry, Rosa said. That must have been terrible, Jake nodded. The worst part was watching my father blame himself. He kept saying he should have been more careful, should have saved more money, should have seen it coming. He died 6 months after we lost the ranch. Heart attack, the doctor said, but I think it was really a broken heart. Rosa felt a chill run through her. The story was too close to her own fears, too similar to the financial pressures that kept her awake at night. Is that why you've been traveling, working different ranches? Partly, Jake said. After everything fell apart, I couldn't stand the idea of settling down somewhere and building something again, just to watch it disappear. It seemed safer to keep moving, take jobs where I could help other people, but not get too attached to the outcome. But don't you want to have your own place again someday? Rosa asked. Jake shrugged. I used to think so. But wanting something and being able to keep it are two different things. Maybe it's better to just enjoy what you have while you have it and not worry about the future. Rosa understood that philosophy, but it made her sad to think about Jake always moving from place to place, never allowing himself to build anything permanent. It also made her more aware of how temporary their current arrangement really was. Jake had been clear from the beginning that he'd be moving on when his truck was fixed, and now she understood why he was so determined not to put down roots. The next day brought the kind of crisis that reminded Rosa why having Jake around was so valuable. One of the cows had gotten tangled in some old wire and injured her leg badly enough that she needed immediate attention. Rosa would have panicked, trying to figure out how to safely restrain a frightened animal while treating the wound by herself. But Jake took control of the situation calmly and efficiently. He talked to the cow in a soothing voice while he examined the injury, then explained to Rosa exactly what needed to be done to clean and bandage the wound properly. "Is she going to be okay?" Luis asked, watching anxiously as Jake worked. "She'll be fine," Jake said confidently. "Cows are tougher than they look, and this isn't as bad as it seems. We just need to keep it clean and check on her every day to make sure it's healing properly." As they walked back to the house after treating the cow, Rosa realized how much she'd come to depend on Jake's knowledge and steady presence. The thought of going back to handling emergencies like this by herself felt almost impossible now. That evening, Jake mentioned that the garage had finally called with good news about his truck. The parts had arrived and they expected to have it running by the end of the week. "That's great," Rosa said, trying to sound enthusiastic even though her heart sank a little. "You must be anxious to get back on the road." Jake looked at her for a moment and Rosa thought she saw something uncertain in his expression. "Yeah," he said finally. "I suppose I should be." But he didn't sound very convinced, and Rosa found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, Jake was having second thoughts about moving on. She didn't want to read too much into it, but there had been moments lately when she'd caught him looking at the ranch and the children with an expression that seemed more like someone who was considering staying than someone who was planning to leave. As Rosa got ready for bed that night, she admitted to herself what she'd been trying not to think about for weeks. She didn't want Jake to leave. It wasn't just about the work, though his help had been invaluable. It was about the way the ranch felt like a home again, instead of just a place where she was struggling to survive. It was about hearing Luis laugh and seeing Carmen's confidence grow with another adult around who paid attention to her. It was about having someone to share the good moments as well as the difficult ones. But Jake had made it clear that this was temporary, and Rosa had agreed to those terms. She couldn't change the rules now just because her feelings had changed. All she could do was hope that maybe Jake's feelings had changed too, and that when the time came to make a decision about his future, he might choose to stay. October had arrived with cooler mornings and the first hints of autumn colors in the trees around the ranch. Rosa found herself paying attention to these seasonal changes in a way she hadn't for the past 2 years. Having Jake around had somehow made her more aware of the beauty in everyday moments. Instead of just focusing on the endless list of things that needed to be done, Jake's truck had been ready for pickup for over a week now. But he kept finding reasons to delay the trip to town. First, he wanted to finish repairing the north fence line. Then he insisted on helping Rosa prepare the cattle for winter by checking their health and making sure they had adequate shelter. Each completed project seemed to lead to the discovery of another task that needed attention. Rosa didn't push him to leave, though she wondered what he was thinking. Sometimes she caught him staring out at the pastures with an expression she couldn't quite read. Other times, she noticed him watching her and the children with something that looked almost like longing in his eyes. The evening conversations on the front porch had become deeper and more personal over the past few weeks. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, and the paths that had led them to this moment. Rosa learned that Jake had been engaged once to a teacher in his hometown in Colorado, but the relationship had ended when his family lost their ranch. "Elizabeth wanted me to move to Denver with her and find a different kind of work," Jake explained one evening. "She said ranching was too risky, too unpredictable. Maybe she was right, but I couldn't imagine doing anything else." "Do you regret not going with her?" Rosa asked. Jake was quiet for a moment. "I regret that I couldn't be what she needed," he said. "But I don't regret staying true to who I am. A man who gives up everything he believes in for someone else isn't much of a man at all." Rosa understood that philosophy, though it made her wonder what Jake would do if he ever had to choose between his wandering lifestyle and something more permanent again. Their work partnership had evolved into something that felt effortless and natural. They anticipated each other's needs and moved around the ranch like they'd been working together for years instead of weeks. Jake had taken over most of the heavy physical work, but he always consulted Rosa about decisions and made sure she understood how to maintain the improvements he'd made. "I don't want you to be dependent on me for things you can handle yourself," he explained when Rosa protested that she didn't need to learn how to repair the hay baler. "Part of helping you is making sure you're prepared to manage everything on your own." The comment stung a little because it reminded Rosa that Jake was still thinking about leaving, but she appreciated his consideration. Too many men would have just taken over completely without thinking about what would happen when they left. Luis had grown especially attached to Jake over the past month. The boy followed him around constantly, absorbing everything Jake could teach him about horses and cattle and land management. Rosa had noticed that Luis was standing straighter and speaking with more confidence. Like having a man around who took him seriously was helping him discover his own capabilities. One afternoon, Rosa overheard a conversation between Luis and Jake that made her heart ache. "My dad died in a car accident," Luis said matter-of-factly as they worked together to repair a gate. "Mom says he's in heaven now, but I still miss him a lot." "I bet you do," Jake replied. "What do you miss most about him?" Luis thought for a moment. "He used to let me help him with everything, even when I was too little to really help. And he always made Mom laugh. She doesn't laugh very much anymore." "Your mom works very hard to take care of you and your sister in this ranch," Jake said. "That's a lot of responsibility for one person. But I think she's starting to laugh more lately, don't you?" Luis nodded. "Yeah, especially when you're around. Are you going to stay here forever?" Rosa held her breath, waiting for Jake's answer. "I don't know, Luis," Jake said honestly. "That's something your mom and I would have to talk about." That evening, after the children were in bed, Rosa found herself thinking about Jake's words. Did that mean he was considering staying? Or was he just being kind to a little boy who'd become attached to him? She was still pondering these questions when Jake joined her on the porch for their usual evening conversation. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. "Rosa," Jake said eventually, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you ever think about getting married again? I mean, do you ever want to have a partner in life, not just help with the ranch work?" Rosa felt her cheeks warm. "I used to think I'd never want that again," she said honestly. "After Miguel died, I couldn't imagine caring about someone that much and risking losing them. It hurt too much, and now?" Rosa took a deep breath. "Now I'm starting to realize that being alone might hurt more than risking loss again. This ranch feels like a home when there's someone to share it with. The children are happier when there's another adult around who cares about them. And She trailed off, not sure how much she should reveal. "You what?" Jake prompted gently. "I like who I am when you're around," Rosa said quietly. "I feel like myself again, not just a widow struggling to survive. I feel like a woman with hopes and dreams and a future worth building." Jake reached over and took her hand. "Rosa, I need to tell you something. I've been putting off going to get my truck because I don't want to leave. I know I said this was temporary, and I meant it when I said it. But being here with you and the children has changed something in me." Rosa's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm falling in love with this life. I'm falling in love with watching Luis grow more confident every day and seeing Carmen's face light up when she learns something new. I'm falling in love with working beside you and knowing that what we're building together matters." He paused, squeezing her hand gently. "And I'm falling in love with you, Rosa. I know it's complicated, and I know I don't have much to offer besides hard work and a willingness to fight for what we could build together. But if you're open to the possibility, I'd like to stay, not as hired help, but as your partner in every way that matters." Rosa felt tears spring to her eyes. "Jake, are you sure? I come with a lot of responsibility and not much money and 2 children who would be heartbroken if you ever decided to leave." "I'm sure," Jake said firmly. "I've spent 3 years running from the possibility of loss, and I'm tired of running. I'd rather take the risk of building something beautiful with you than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been." Rosa looked at this man who had appeared in her driveway asking for water and had somehow become essential to her family's happiness. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been afraid to admit it even to myself, but I do." Jake smiled and leaned over to kiss her gently. "So what do you say? Are you willing to take a chance on an old cowboy who's ready to stop wandering?" "Yes," Rosa said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I think I am." As they sat together on the porch, holding hands and talking about their future, Rosa felt something she hadn't experienced in over 2 years. Hope. Real, genuine hope for tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. She still didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but she knew she wouldn't be facing them alone anymore. For the first time since Miguel's death, Rosa could imagine herself truly happy again. And that felt like the most precious gift of all. November brought the first serious snowstorm of the season, and with it a test that Rosa and Jake hadn't expected so early in their relationship. The storm hit on a Thursday night with winds that howled around the ranch buildings and snow that fell so thick they couldn't see the barn from the house. Rosa woke up around midnight to the sound of something banging against the side of the house. Jake was already getting dressed, having heard it too. "Sounds like part of the barn roof might be loose," he said, pulling on his boots. "I better go check before it gets worse." "Jake, you can't go out in this weather," Rosa protested. It's too dangerous, but even as she said it, they both knew he didn't have a choice. If the barn roof was damaged, the animals could be in serious danger. Jake kissed her quickly and headed out into the storm with a flashlight and a rope tied around his waist so he could find his way back to the house if visibility got too bad. Rosa spent the next hour pacing the kitchen and checking on the children, who had woken up scared by the noise of the wind. She made hot chocolate and tried to distract them with stories, but her attention was focused on listening for any sound of Jake returning. When he finally came back, he was covered in snow and his face was grim. "We've got problems," he said, accepting the hot coffee Rosa handed him. "Part of the barn roof is gone and there's damage to the cattle shelter too. The animals are okay for now, but if this storm lasts much longer, we could lose some of them." Rosa felt her stomach drop. Losing cattle would be a financial disaster that could cost them the ranch. "What can we do?" "We need to get the animals moved to better shelter," Jake said. "The main barn is still sound and we can crowd them in there until the storm passes. But it's going to mean going back out in this weather and moving probably 30 head of cattle in the dark." Rosa didn't hesitate. "Then that's what we'll do." "Rosa, this is going to be dangerous. Moving cattle in a storm like this, Jake, this is my ranch and my livelihood," Rosa interrupted. "If there's a chance to save the cattle, we have to try." Luis appeared in the kitchen doorway, having overheard the conversation. "I can help," he said seriously. "I know how to move cattle." Jake looked at the 8-year-old boy with respect. "I know you do, Luis, but this storm is too dangerous for anyone who doesn't absolutely have to be out in it." "Then I'll stay here with Carmen and make sure she's safe," Luis said, understanding the gravity of the situation. "And I'll keep the coffee hot for when you come back." Rosa felt a surge of pride in her son's maturity, even as her heart raced with fear about what lay ahead. She and Jake spent the next 4 hours working in conditions that were barely survivable. The wind was so strong it knocked them down several times, and the snow was so thick they could barely see each other even when they were only a few feet apart. Moving the cattle required patience, skill, and a good measure of luck, since spooked animals in a storm could easily injure or kill someone. But somehow, working together, they managed to get all the cattle safely moved to the main barn. Rosa had never been so cold or so exhausted in her life, but she also felt a deep sense of accomplishment. They had faced a real crisis together and come through it successfully. As they finally stumbled back into the warm house, soaked and shivering, Rosa realized something important had happened during those dangerous hours. She and Jake had functioned as true partners, each trusting the other completely and working toward the same goal without hesitation or doubt. "You were amazing out there," Jake said as they changed into dry clothes. "I've worked with men who wouldn't have had the courage to do what you did tonight." "We were amazing," Rosa corrected. "I couldn't have saved those cattle by myself." The next morning brought clear skies and the massive job of assessing storm damage. The roof repairs alone would cost several $1,000s, money that Rosa simply didn't have. As they walked around the ranch surveying the destruction, Rosa felt the familiar weight of financial worry settling on her shoulders again. "How bad is it?" she asked Jake, who was examining the damaged cattle shelter. "Bad enough," he said honestly. "This isn't something we can fix with spare parts and hope. We're going to need professional help and materials that cost real money." Rosa sat down on a pile of lumber that had been scattered by the wind and put her head in her hands. Just when she'd started to believe that maybe she could make the ranch work, that maybe she and Jake could build something together, reality came crashing back. "Rosa," Jake said gently, sitting down beside her, "we'll figure this out. There are always solutions if you're willing to work for them." "With what money?" Rosa asked. "I'm already behind on the mortgage and now this. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe I should have sold this place 2 years ago instead of trying to keep it going." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you really want to do?" Rosa looked around at the land that had been in Miguel's family for 3 generations, at the house where her children had been born and learned to walk and said their first words. "No," she said firmly. But wanting something and being able to afford it are two different things. Rosa, I have some money saved up, Jake said carefully. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to cover the repairs and maybe a few months of mortgage payments. Rosa stared at him. Jake, I can't take your money. That's everything you've saved from years of work. It's not taking if I'm offering, Jake said. And it's not just your ranch anymore, is it? If we're going to be partners in life, then we're partners in everything, including the problems and the solutions. Rosa felt tears spring to her eyes. But what if something happens? What if we can't make the ranch profitable and we lose everything? Then you'd lose your savings too. Jake took her hands in his. Rosa, 3 years ago I lost everything I thought mattered. My family's ranch, my father's respect, my plans for the future. I learned that you can survive losing everything material if you don't lose hope in the people you love. He paused, looking into her eyes. I'd rather risk my savings trying to build something beautiful with you than keep it safe in a bank while I watch you struggle alone. Money is just money. But this... He gestured around at the ranch toward the house where the children were probably making breakfast. This is a life worth fighting for. Rosa felt her heart swell with love and gratitude. Are you sure? Really sure? I've never been more sure of anything, Jake said. We're in this together now, for better or worse. That afternoon, they called contractors and ordered materials and began making plans for repairs that would make the ranch building stronger than they'd been before the storm. Rosa still felt nervous about accepting Jake's help, but she also felt something she'd almost forgotten, the security of knowing she wasn't facing life's challenges alone. As they worked side by side, planning and organizing and solving problems together, Rosa realized that the storm had given them something valuable. It had tested their partnership under pressure and proven that they could depend on each other when things got difficult. That evening, as they sat on the porch despite the cold air, Rosa reached for Jake's hand. Thank you, she said simply, not just for the money, but for being willing to risk everything to help me save what matters most. Jake squeezed her hand. Thank you for letting me be part of something worth saving. Rosa smiled, feeling more hopeful about the future than she had in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together. And that made all the difference in the world. December arrived with a crisis that threatened everything Rosa and Jake had been building together. A certified letter from the bank arrived on a Monday morning, and Rosa's hands were shaking as she opened it at the kitchen table while Jake made coffee and the children got ready for school. What does it say? Jake asked, noticing Rosa's pale face. Rosa read the letter twice before she could speak. They're accelerating the loan, she said finally. They want the full balance of the mortgage paid within 60 days or they're going to foreclose on the ranch. Jake sat down across from her and took the letter, reading it carefully. This doesn't make sense. You've been making payments, right? I've been late a few times, but I always catch up, Rosa said. And with your help, I'm actually current now. Why would they do this? The answer came when Rosa called the bank that afternoon. The loan officer explained that the property had been reassessed after the storm damage, and the bank had decided that Rosa represented too high a credit risk as a single mother trying to run a ranch alone. But I'm not alone anymore, Rosa protested. My partner has been helping with both the work and the finances. I'm sorry, Mrs. Valdez, but unless your partner is legally obligated to the debt, the bank can't consider his income or assets in their risk assessment. The decision has been made. Rosa hung up the phone feeling like the world was crashing down around her. Even with Jake's savings, they didn't have enough money to pay off the entire mortgage. And getting a new loan would be almost impossible with her credit history and the current condition of the ranch buildings. There has to be something we can do, Jake said when Rosa explained the situation. Banks don't just call in loans for no reason. There's got to be more to this story. Rosa spent the rest of the week making phone calls and trying to understand what had happened. Finally, she discovered the truth. A development company had been buying up ranch land in the area, planning to build a shopping center and housing development. They'd been pressuring the bank to foreclose on properties they wanted to acquire, and Rosa's ranch was right in the middle of their target area. So this isn't really about my credit risk, Rosa said to Jake that evening. It's about someone wanting to force me off my land so they can make money developing it. Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the pastures where the cattle were settling down for the night. Rosa, I need to tell you something. I have enough money to pay off the mortgage. Rosa stared at him. What do you mean? When my family lost our ranch, I got a small inheritance from my grandfather. I've been carrying it around for 3 years, not sure what to do with it. It's enough to pay off your mortgage and have some left over for improvements. Rosa felt her heart racing. Jake, that's your inheritance. Your grandfather meant that money for you, not for someone else's ranch. My grandfather would have wanted me to use it to build something good, Jake said. But Rosa, there's something you need to understand. If I pay off this mortgage, I'll be putting everything I have into this place. I won't have anything to fall back on if things don't work out. Rosa understood what he was saying. You're asking me to marry you, Jake nodded. I'm asking you to make this partnership official and permanent. I'm asking you to let me invest everything I have in our future together, knowing that we'll succeed or fail as a team. Rosa felt tears coming to her eyes. Jake, what if I'm not worth that kind of risk? What if I let you down the way I let Miguel down?
How did you let Miguel down?
Jake asked gently. If I'd been a better partner, maybe he wouldn't have been driving in that storm. Maybe he wouldn't have taken that extra job to help pay the bills. Maybe— Rosa, stop, Jake interrupted. Miguel's death was a tragic accident, not something you caused. And from everything I've seen, you've been the best partner and mother anyone could ask for. Rosa looked at this man who had wandered into her life asking for water and had somehow become essential to her happiness. Are you sure about this? Really, truly sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Jake said. I love you, Rosa. I love Luis and Carmen. I love this land and what we can build together. I want to marry you and spend the rest of my life proving that some risks are worth taking. Rosa thought about all the reasons she should say no. The ranch was struggling, money would always be tight, and there were no guarantees about the future. But she also thought about how much happier her children had been over the past few months, how much stronger she felt with Jake beside her, and how empty life would be if she let fear make her decisions. Yes, she said finally. Yes, I'll marry you. And yes, I'll let you save the ranch. But on one condition. What's that? We do this as equal partners. Your money doesn't make you the boss, and my land doesn't make me the boss. We make decisions together, we work together, and we build something that belongs to both of us. Jake smiled and pulled her into his arms. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. They told the children the next morning over breakfast. Luis whooped with joy and immediately started asking when the wedding would be and whether he could be Jake's best man. Carmen clapped her hands and announced that she wanted to wear a princess dress and carry flowers. So Jake is going to be our new daddy? Carmen asked. Jake is going to be your stepfather, Rosa explained. He'll never try to replace your daddy, but he loves you very much and wants to help take care of you. Luis looked serious for a moment. I think Dad would like Jake, he said. He always said the most important thing was for Mom to be happy. Rosa felt her eyes fill with tears. I think Dad would like Jake too. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Rosa and Jake met with lawyers to handle the mortgage payment and make sure all the legal paperwork was in order. They planned a small wedding ceremony for Christmas Eve, figuring it would be a perfect way to start their new life together during the season of hope and new beginnings. Rosa called her mother to share the news, expecting resistance or criticism. Instead, her mother surprised her. I was worried about you trying to run that ranch alone, she said. But if you found someone who loves you and the children and wants to help you keep Miguel's family land, then I think that's wonderful. When do I get to meet this Jake? Word spread quickly through their small community about the upcoming wedding. Neighbors who had been keeping their distance, unsure how to help a struggling widow, suddenly appeared with offers of assistance and wedding gifts. The local minister agreed to perform the ceremony, and Rosa's sister offered to make the wedding cake. As Christmas Eve approached, Rosa found herself feeling more hopeful about the future than she had since Miguel's death. The ranch was secure, the children were happy, and she was about to marry a man who had proven his love not just with words but with actions. The night before the wedding, as Rosa tucked Carmen into bed, her daughter looked up at her with serious eyes. Mama, are you going to be happy now? Rosa smiled and kissed her daughter's forehead. I think I am, sweetheart. I think we all are. As Rosa got ready for bed herself, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she'd been alone and struggling, afraid she might lose everything Miguel had worked for. Now she was about to start a new chapter with a partner who had chosen to risk everything to build a life with her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but it would also bring new possibilities. And for the first time in 2 years, Rosa was genuinely excited to see what the future would hold. Christmas Eve morning dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow covering the ranch like a white blanket. Rosa woke up early not because she had to, but because she was too excited to sleep any longer. Today was her wedding day, and for the first time in years, she felt like the luckiest woman in the world. The ceremony was planned for 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right there in the front yard of the ranch house. Rosa had insisted on keeping everything simple and personal, surrounded by the land and buildings that had brought her and Jake together. About 30 people would be there, family, close friends, and neighbors who had become like family over the years. Rosa's sister had arrived the day before with the wedding cake and had taken charge of decorating the house with pine boughs and white ribbons. Luis and Carmen had helped by stringing lights around the porch and picking the last of the winter wildflowers to make bouquets. Even Jake had gotten into the spirit, spending the morning making sure all the ranch buildings looked their best for the guests who would be arriving later. "You nervous?" Rosa's sister asked as they worked together in the kitchen, preparing food for the reception. "Not nervous exactly," Rosa said, adding more sugar to the punch. "Excited maybe. And grateful. A year ago I never could have imagined feeling this happy again." "Jake seems like a good man," her sister said. "Miguel would have approved." Rosa nodded, feeling the familiar pang of missing her first husband. But it wasn't the sharp, overwhelming grief it used to be. Now it was more like a gentle sadness mixed with gratitude for the love she'd had, and the love she'd found again. Around noon, Rosa went upstairs to get ready for the ceremony. She'd found a simple but elegant dress in town, nothing fancy, but it made her feel beautiful and special. As she looked at herself in the mirror, Rosa thought about how much had changed since Jake first appeared in her driveway asking for water. "Mama, you look like a princess," Carmen announced, appearing in the doorway wearing her own special dress. "Thank you, sweetheart," Rosa said, giving her daughter a hug. "Are you excited about today?" "Yes," Jake said. "After you get married, we're going to be a real family, and he's going to teach me how to ride the horses properly, and Luis how to fix engines like he does." Rosa smiled, thinking about all the dreams and plans she and Jake had made over the past month. They wanted to expand the cattle operation gradually, maybe add some horses for people to ride. Jake had ideas about offering ranch experiences for city families who wanted to see what real country life was like. Rosa had dreams of selling organic beef and vegetables at farmers' markets in town. But more than any business plans, Rosa was excited about building a life together. She looked forward to mornings when she wouldn't be carrying all the responsibility alone, evenings when there would be another adult to share the day's joys and frustrations with, and nights when she wouldn't fall asleep wondering if she was strong enough to handle whatever tomorrow might bring. As the afternoon progressed, guests began arriving. Rosa's mother had driven out from the city, and she immediately fell in love with the ranch and with Jake's polite, respectful manner. Miguel's brother came with his family, and Rosa was touched when he pulled Jake aside for a serious conversation about taking care of Rosa and the children. "Miguel was my best friend," Rosa overheard him saying. "He'd want to know that his family is in good hands." "They will be," Jake promised solemnly. "I love them all, and I'll do everything I can to make them happy and keep them safe." The neighbors who came brought covered dishes and wedding gifts, but more importantly, they brought their acceptance and support. Mrs. Henderson from the ranch to the south gave Rosa a hug and whispered, "It's about time you had some happiness again, dear." As 4 o'clock approached, Rosa felt her excitement building. She stood at the upstairs window, watching Jake greet the guests and help set up chairs in the front yard. He looked handsome in his best suit, but more than that, he looked happy and relaxed, like a man who was exactly where he belonged. Luis appeared at Rosa's elbow, wearing his own good clothes and carrying the ring that Jake had asked him to hold during the ceremony. "Mom, are you ready?" he asked seriously. "I'm ready," Rosa said, meaning it completely. The ceremony itself was simple and beautiful. Rosa walked out of the house accompanied by Luis and Carmen, who scattered flower petals along the path to where Jake was waiting with the minister. The afternoon sun was slanting through the bare tree branches, and everything looked magical in the golden light. When the minister asked if Rosa would take Jake to be her husband, through good times and bad, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, Rosa's voice was strong and clear as she said, "I do." When Jake made the same promise to her, There were tears in his eyes, and Rosa knew he meant every word. Luis handed over the ring with great ceremony, and Carmen beamed as she watched her mother and Jake exchange vows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in cheers and applause. "Ladies and gentlemen," the minister announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Jake Henderson." As Jake kissed his new wife, Rosa felt like her heart might burst with happiness. This was her second chance at love, and she was determined to treasure every moment of it. The reception was exactly what Rosa had hoped for: warm, friendly, and relaxed. People ate and talked and shared stories about Rosa and Miguel's early years on the ranch, and about Jake's arrival and the changes he'd brought to their little family. Children ran around playing while adults visited and caught up on community news. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Rosa stood with Jake on the front porch watching the last car drive away down the dusty road. "So, Mrs. Henderson," Jake said, putting his arm around his wife's shoulders, "how does it feel to be married again?" "It feels right," Rosa said simply. "Like this is how things were always supposed to be." They went inside to help Luis and Carmen clean up the dishes and decorations, working together as a family. Later, after the children were in bed, Rosa and Jake sat together on their couch, talking about their hopes for the future. "I know it won't always be easy," Jake said. "Ranching never is, and blending families takes time and patience. But I believe we can build something really special here." "We already have," Rosa said, looking around at the house that finally felt like a home again. "A year ago, I was barely hanging on, trying to do everything by myself and failing most of the time. Now look at us." 6 months later, in early summer, Rosa stood in her garden picking tomatoes while Jake and Luis worked on building new shelters for the expanded cattle herd. Carmen was helping by carrying the harvested vegetables to the house, chattering happily about her plans to sell some of their produce at the farmers' market in town. The ranch was thriving in ways Rosa had never imagined possible. Jake's business ideas were working, and they'd had a steady stream of families coming out to experience ranch life firsthand. The cattle were healthy and growing, the finances were stable, and most importantly, the children were happy and confident. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rosa reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with such a simple thing, a stranger asking for water on a hot afternoon. But sometimes the most profound changes in life come from the smallest beginnings. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if your truck hadn't overheated that day?" Rosa asked Jake. Jake smiled and pulled her closer. "I try not to think about that," he said. "I'm too grateful for what did happen. Sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them." Rosa nodded, thinking about how true that was. She'd thought her chance for happiness had ended when Miguel died. She'd never imagined that love could find her again, or that her children could have another father figure who would care for them so completely. As the stars came out over the ranch, Rosa felt a deep sense of peace and contentment. This wasn't the life she'd planned when she was young, but it was a good life, built on love and hard work and the willingness to take chances on each other. "Thank you," she whispered to Jake. "For what?" "For asking for water that day. For staying to help. For choosing us." Jake kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for saying yes to all of it. For taking a chance on a wandering cowboy who didn't know he was looking for home until he found it." Rosa smiled, knowing that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, and that made all the difference in the world.